Summary of A Taste of Honey by Shelagh Delaney. Jo, who is 17 years old, and her mother Helen, are carrying their baggage into their new apartment. The discussion between the two women quickly reveals that their relationship is marked by regular tension, misunderstanding, and underlying anger, in addition to interdependence. Even though Jo attacks the apartment's state right away, it soon becomes clear that her anger has deeper roots. She yells at Helen for drinking too much and for making their lives unsafe by moving from apartment to apartment because of Helen's relationships with fancy men, or lovers who give her money. Jo also doesn't like how Helen doesn't care about her. Jo feels mentally and financially abandoned by her mother, who doesn't care much about her life and always does what makes her happy without thinking about how it affects her daughter. To sum up, Jo says that all she wants is to get a job so she can live away from her mother and be financially independent. Helen doesn't seem to care about her daughter Jo's pain or listen to what she has to say. Because it takes her too much time to handle her own, she says she doesn't see the point in getting involved in other people's lives. But not long after they move in, she sees her daughter's drawings and knows that Jo is creative. She tells her that she will pay for her to go to art school and is very excited about the idea. Jo says no, saying that Helen has always made it hard for her to get a good education. But this episode still shows that Helen believes in her daughter's brains and artistic abilities, even though she can't or won't help them grow most of the time. Peter, one of Helen's lovers, walks into the flat while the two women are still fighting. He starts to flirt with Helen, who is shocked to see him. He is confident and brave. Peter finds out that Helen is a lot older than he thought when he learns that Jo is Helen's daughter. As the talk goes on, Jo figures out that Helen was trying to get away from Peter for unknown reasons, which is why they recently moved. At the same time, Helen seems pleased by Peter's brazen attempts to seduce her, even though she turned him down. Peter suddenly asks Helen to marry him in jest. As Helen says no, his offer gets stronger and more demanding. Helen is surprised at first, but in the end she tells him that if he asks her again, she probably will say yes. Jo is walking home from school with her boyfriend, Jimmy, a black sailor who is leaving the Navy in a few weeks. This is the second scene of Act 1. Jimmy thinks that Jo must feel bad about being seen with him on the street because they are dating, but Jo doesn't see any reason to hide, and he is impressed by how honest she is. Their relationship is fun and lighthearted, but all of a sudden Jimmy asks Jo to marry him, and she says yes. Jo tries to hide the ring around her neck so her mother won't see it when he gives it to her. Even though Jo doesn't think Helen would mind Jimmy's skin color, she doesn't want Helen to make fun of her for getting engaged. Helen finds out that Jo has a boyfriend when Jo comes into her room and questions her about him. Helen suddenly tells Peter that she is going to marry him later in the talk. The young woman's response seems to be based on sadness, as she thinks Helen is leaving her again while Jo says Helen is too old to get married. Then Peter comes in with flowers for Helen and sweets for Jo. Helen tells Jo to leave Peter alone because she is acting mean toward him and seems to be trying to get him angry. When Jo finds out that Peter bought a house for himself and Helen, she feels totally alone. Ellen tells Jo that she is only getting Peter for his money when Jo asks her mother why she is going to marry him. Jo lies down on the bed and starts to cry after Helen and Peter leave. After that, her boyfriend comes in and tries to make her feel better. Jo asks him to stay with her for Christmas, but she doesn't seem to believe his claims of love or his promises to come back. Instead, her gut tells her that she most likely won't see him again. Helen is getting married soon. Helen attacks Jo for being stupid when she sees the ring around her neck and learns that her daughter is now engaged. She seems very upset about her daughter's choice. She tells her that she is too young to be stuck in marriage and tries to talk her out of getting married. Instead, Jo attacks Helen and says that she is to blame for what is happening. Furthermore, she says that she is already ruined, which makes Helen say even meaner things. Jo asks Helen about her dad before she goes. Helen says that Jo's father was mentally ill and that she had sex with him to make up for the fact that her rich husband didn't like having sex. Jo tells Helen that she is neither happy nor sad to see her go as she walks away. After a few months, Act 2 starts. I can see that Jo is pregnant now that she lives alone in the same apartment. She comes into the room with her art student friend Jeffrey, whom she thinks has been kicked out for being gay. She asks Jeff about his sexuality in a mean and insulting way, which makes him angry and want to leave. Jo says she's sorry and invites him to stay with her, telling him he can sleep on the couch. She knows she has hurt his feelings. And then Jeff asks Jo about her pregnancy. He does this to show that he cares about her and wants to take care of her. This leads to them moving in together, where they become close friends over the next few months. Even though Jo is sure that her relationship with Jeff isn't sexual and just gives them both much-needed love and comfort, Jeff does grab her and force her to kiss him one time. And he asks her to marry him. But Jo tells him she doesn't like him that way and doesn't want to marry anyone. Helen then walks into the flat out of the blue. Because Jeff thought Jo's mother should know she was pregnant, he called Helen and asked her to come take care of her daughter. But Jo is mad at Jeff for talking about her behind her back, and Helen's visit quickly turns into a fight. Helen accuses Jo of being pregnant and says she doesn't have to care for her child or grandchild. Helen and Jo both hit Jeff to keep him from joining the fight while he tries to step in. Peter walks into the room in the middle of this conversation. He starts to make fun of everyone while he's drunk, including Jo's pregnancy, Jeff's flaws, and Helen's reliance on him. He doesn't care about Jo's tough situation and won't let Helen give her money or a place to live. He finally leaves, and Helen at first says she's going to stay with Jo instead of going with him. But she gives in and follows him out. After a few months, Jo is almost done with her pregnancy. Even though she gets angry and disgusted by the thought of being a mother sometimes, she seems happy in her relationship with Jeff. She also says that, even though she and her mother fight all the time, she wishes her mother were there with her at this important time. Then, Helen walks into the room with her bags, just like in the play's first scene. Helen acts like she's back to take care of Jo, but her daughter soon finds out that Peter broke up with her for another woman, so Helen has to go back to Jo's apartment. Helen has a strong hate for Jeff and is able to get him to leave the apartment for good by making mean comments and being rude. Jeff says that Jo can't handle having both of them in the same room, which is why he is leaving. Before he leaves, he tells Helen not to scare Jo about the risks of childbirth more than is necessary. Helen tells Jeff not to tell her what to do in return. At the end of the play, Jo is starting to feel birth pains. Helen supports Jo in the bedroom while hiding the fact that she just told Jeff to leave. This goes on until Jo tells Helen that her baby is likely to be dark-skinned, which Helen sees as yet another social embarrassment. She decides that she needs to get a drink instead of being with Jo during this important time. So, Jo is back in the room by herself. She smiles as she remembers a childhood song that Jeff used to sing to her. She doesn't know that he has left. She sings it softly to herself, and the happy tune seems to make her feel better.
About the author. Shelagh Delaney was born in 1938 into an Irish working-class family and grew up in a small town of northwestern England's Greater Manchester area. Although Delaney had some problems in school, she quickly became good at writing. When she was 18, she wrote her first play, A Taste of Honey, in just 10 days. Even though Delaney went on to do work in books, film, television, and theater after this play, it was the play that launched her career and is still her most praised work. People think of the play as an important part of the working class and feminist cultural movements of the 1950s. It was also one of the most important works in the literary movement known as kitchen sink realism because it dealt with race, sexuality, and class in new and complicated ways. Delaney was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 1985. The Royal Society of Literature is an elite group that rewards and promotes writing ability.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.